Thank you. Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Is it okay if I continue? I appreciate that. I don't want to
go ahead,
I don't
Senator
want to
Work.
dissuade
Yeah.
anybody else. I appreciate that. I appreciate the answers. We may differ on some of the details, but I appreciate it. Mr. Chairman, may I direct a question to you, if I could, please?
Go ahead.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'm having a really hard time understanding Section 5, which is the indemnification. And I want to make sure that I understand what the indemnification is getting at. Mr. Chairman, it's my understanding that the immunity provision here doesn't cover the issues that are raised in the rest of the bill. In other words, when state statute says, thou shalt do this, they got to do it. But the immunity here applies to whether they have additional policies. So, for instance, my understanding, Mr. Chairman, and please correct me if I'm wrong because I'm really trying to understand, if one of the universities after this would pass were to decide that they wanted to allow firearms within dormitories, for instance, that students could carry a firearm through their policy into a dormitory. And then under this provision, my understanding is that all liability, including gross negligence by the university itself, would be excused. There would be no liability. So, for instance, if a university extended the right to carry in a dormitory under any circumstances at all, and they knew that there was a student that was mentally ill that had made continuing threats toward either a student or group of students or faculty or whatever that would be, and that student within those confines committed a crime, and the university knew that that was a very large possibility, that under this immunity, the university would hold no liability, no civil liability whatsoever for the commission of that crime. Am I reading this correctly?
No.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you please help me out here?
Right. So what it does, it preempts their regulatory authority in a very limited regard. And that regard is top of basically page 3, subsection 2 there. It says, their authority doesn't extend to these two categories, which Mr. Moore explained, retired police officers and those with enhanced carry. But within that preemption, we limit that further to those two locations on campus, which are the dorms and the public entertainment facilities. So the authority doesn't extend to those, but a university could expand the right to carry on other parts of the university. So if a university followed states that allow like a standard carry on other parts of their university in vehicles, for instance, and said if you have a regular permit, you could have a firearm in your vehicle. They could do that. And for making that policy decision, we wouldn't create additional liability, but they still would have liability if they were negligent or gross negligent or whatever the standard is for a government entity in implementing whatever policy they had. So, for example, if the university is aware that students are having a party in a dorm and that students are armed and shooting bottles at a window and doesn't prevent that, then there could be liability, just like there would be now.
And Mr. Chairman, a follow-up if I could.
Go ahead.
And Mr. Chairman, I'm still struggling. I understand what you're saying to me, but when I read this, it basically takes away any action for civil damages in a court of the state against this whole group of people where the claim arises out of the policy of the board or commission to either specifically allow or not prohibit the lawful possession and storage of firearms on its property. And it sounds to me, it reads to me like it's a blanket indemnification, that if the claim arises out of the policy, and the policy would be, we've decided that we want to allow people to carry in dormitories or at the BSU football game or whatever it would be. The beginning says basically no action shall lie or be maintained for civil damages in any court of the state. So I'm struggling to figure out how that broad language is somehow limited to only the creation of the policy as opposed to the gross negligence in not following up on the policy that's been created.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Burke. So as you just read, it relates to the policy itself. That's what the language says. And as I mentioned before, it wouldn't extend to allowing it to a Boise State game, as you gave in your example there, because as we've already discussed, we've preempted the authority in that area. And I can't help you further with your understanding of the language, Senator.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the attempt to help. I'm still not there, but I appreciate that attempt.
I can tell. Senator Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Moore, my pressing question was the one that Senator Work led with, about whether this is a stepping stone by your employer to get where they wanted us to be 3 years ago. Although he did a lot better job of pinning you down than I would have done.
Yeah.
But I appreciate your answer on that. I also appreciate you addressing the definition of building in your presentation, which I was getting hung up on. But I just feel like I would be amiss if I didn't sincerely thank you for working with us, trying to address some of the concerns of this committee that we expressed 3 years ago to try to come up with a bill that better fits Idaho. I think it is a better bill, and I'm glad to know that you think it is too. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Hill.
Thank you. Any other questions from the committee? Senator.
This microphone of its own, and I apologize. I'm just trying to clarify one more thing.
Yes,
and I'm
ma'am.
sorry, I'm stuck
No,
on the
there's no
buildings
problem.
again and open space. So you had mentioned that the reason why there was the restriction within building is because when you have a gathering, if something happens inadvertently, somebody could get injured. So you have, because of the numbers in confinement, I'm just trying to understand why, again, there was that limitation. Why the building limitation at 1,000 was. Is that because of possible inadvertent harm, or what was the reason again?
No, ma'am. It wasn't to, as you said, the confined spaces. That wasn't the intent behind the 1,000 persons. It was really aimed at addressing the concerns that were raised in 2011 over House Bill 222 and the fact that such legislation could have an adverse effect on these universities, colleges and universities' ability to host certain events. I mean, such as Boise State, I mean, the preeminent entertainment venue is Taco Bell Arena, and it's a university venue. A lot of entertainment contracts do hold provisions that restrict the possession or require, a weapon-free facility or something of the sort. And so this was intended to ensure that, and as I mentioned earlier, each one of these things is a license, it's a contractual relationship. So all you'd have to do is put it on the ticket, and by virtue of your purchasing the ticket and using that ticket for admission, would be entering a contractual relationship saying that you would not, contradict the terms of the contract. But it was just intended to assuage those concerns about hosting events primarily. It had nothing to do with the confined spaces.
Mr. Chairman, so it was purely for, because of contractual reasons and not because of reasons of safety?
Well, and I did mention earlier that I believe that the universities, for the most part, do a better job of keeping students protected at these large entertainment venues. Whereas if you enter a university, you don't usually go through a security check. My wife wouldn't have her purse checked if she was just merely entering Boise State University. Whereas in most, stadiums or stadium-type facilities, you do have those type of security measures. So you have someone, if you recall ever walking into a basketball game or football game, you have a security guard there when you walk in, making sure that, you don't have a bomb in your purse or something like that. Well, you don't have that in the university in general. And so that was more to address that concern and also acknowledge the fact that at these venues where security is provided at every point of ingress and egress, there is a greater semblance of safety. Not what I would call a safe environment, but it's a greater semblance of safety.
Mr. Chairman, just one last question.
Yes, ma'am.
And it's a hard question, but I
Okay.
have to ask it.
Yes, ma'am.
Because it's been brought to me by parents and faculty. If you have a student who is armed properly, even with all the requirements you're specifying here,
Yes, ma'am.
and he's in the classroom where he is not necessarily checked, he or she, and something, some incident occurs in the classroom, and that person inadvertently, mistakenly shoots somebody who's innocent, not the shooter or whatever is inciting the problem in the classroom, are you comfortable with that?
Well, the way you phrased that question, I'm not going to be able to answer it because all I can talk about is statistics, and statistics show that this isn't an issue that happens, and that it's just as likely to happen at any other location as it would a college or university campus. Furthermore, I would say that, I can't address that. I understand the concerns, but what I can say is I believe that the right to keep and bear arms is a fundamental and constitutional right, and I believe that it should be, that it protects more than it harms. And I honestly believe that, and I can honestly look at everyone on this committee and say I think this bill will make our college and university campuses safer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, we'll try and get through people who signed up to testify. And as I mentioned before, we'll try and go through those who'd signed up prior to the committee and then alternate with those who signed up this morning, both for and against.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator
excuse
Sidway.
me, I did have a couple of
Okay.
questions.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I guess mine are practical in nature. So if I have and I'm afraid that this may somehow lead to an infringement of one's right to carry. But if on our Section 2 on page 3, where it says you shall not carry a concealed weapon within a dormitory, practically speaking, if I'm carrying a concealed weapon, I go to my classes, I do my work, I come back. What am I supposed to do with my concealed weapon? Hang it on the lamppost out in front of the dormitory?
Well,
Is that going to be an infringement on our right to carry?
Yes, sir, and I understand your question. And the first thing that I would say is, as I mentioned earlier, a large, very, very large majority of individuals who live in the dormitories wouldn't qualify for this permit anyway because you have to be over the age of 21. So you're in effect talking about juniors and most likely seniors at universities. That makes up a very small number. However, I would also submit that the definition of dormitory in, I guess it would be 2B Romanet 2, and it includes the parking lot and prohibits, even if the parking lot is pertinent to the building or attached to the building, would permit them to leave the firearm in their locked vehicle. So just the same as we allow in our elementary schools and our secondary schools right now under current Idaho law.
So, Mr. Chairman, a follow-up,
Go ahead.
please. So if I don't have a car, then you're basically telling me that this is an age discrimination on the right to bear arms?
No, sir, I'm not telling you that because you do not have to mandatorily live in a dormitory. You have a choice to live off campus and be able to reside somewhere in which this isn't infringed.
And one more,
Go ahead.
please, Mr. Chairman, thank you. And can you tell me if I'm a hunter, and I know this is specific to, well, I don't know that it's specific to campuses, but if I'm carrying a concealed weapon and my routine is I get up, I put my pants on, I put my shirt on, I put my boots on, and I put my gun on, and then I go to work. Is there any way that this is going to, the penalties applied here, if I have my uniform on and I'm going to work, and my work that day happens to be hunting out in the field,
Yes, sir.
is if I'm intoxicated while I'm hunting that day, is there any way that that these penalties for this concealed weapon are going to apply to that hunter that day in the field just because he has a concealed weapon?
So just to clarify, you are talking about in the field and not on a university campus,
Right.
right? Well, that revocation penalty would not occur. It's only applicable to carrying a firearm on college or university campuses. However, under current Idaho law, such possession of a firearm while under the influence, if you're actually actively carrying on your person, would be a misdemeanor.
Right.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.